What's the creepiest thing that you've ever encountered on a road trip? Aggressive drivers, flat tires? Well, how about a dark and mysterious satanic cult that plans on kidnapping your entire family for reasons unknown? Well, buckle up because this creepy, scary, and allegedly true story will have you thinking twice the next time you consider staying at a bed and breakfast. A young girl that we will call Angela is taking a road trip with her family in upstate New York. So, with her are her parents, her grandmother, her brother, who is about her age, and her baby brother, who is an infant. And for those unfamiliar with upstate New York, it is really nothing like New York City. The two just are not comparable. There are some extremely rural areas and forests that stretch on for miles and miles. Angela's dad had booked a bed and breakfast ahead of time, and that was the destination for the first day of travel. And this was in the days before the internet, and so, as some of you may remember, you had to rely on physical road maps to navigate. And this could make it very easy to get lost when you're driving through rural and through unfamiliar roads. So because of this, it took much longer than anticipated to get to this bed and breakfast. Finally, though, they do get there, and it's this nice little house that is kind of way out in this rural part of upstate New York. And they go inside and they go up to the reception desk, and her dad rings the bell, and out comes this woman. And the woman seems super friendly and shows the family this big smile. And Angela realizes immediately that this front desk lady was missing the front two teeth on both the upper and lower part of her mouth. She's trying not to stare and trying not to be rude, but it was just kind of odd because the rest of this woman's teeth seemed perfectly fine. So it wasn't like all of her teeth were in bad shape, which you might expect, but, who knows? Her dad gives this woman the reservation name, but she tells him that they don't have any vacancy. And so immediately Angela's dad obviously starts getting upset. He's saying, look, I called 2 weeks ago and you gave me a reservation, and we are way out now in the middle of nowhere. We don't know this area. We don't know other places to stay. What are we supposed to do? The woman again smiles this big toothless smile, and she says that it's okay because she knows of another hotel that's just up the road a ways. And it's the same rate. It's just as good. So it's no problem. And she's certain that they will have vacancy for the family. And Angela's dad is upset, but what can he really do? He doesn't have any choice other than to accept this offer. So the woman offers to call this second hotel and sort things out. But first, she said, I need to show you around this house. You see, my husband is a great artist and I want to show off his work. And it's kind of weird considering that they wouldn't be staying there anyway. But again, it's not really an option to say no since they need this woman's help to make the reservation at the other hotel. So the family is ushered up these steps and they start to enter this room as a group. And as they're entering the room, Angela recalls seeing just a couple of the pieces of art in there. She could tell that the room was completely adorned with art, but she's only able to see kind of a few examples of what's in there. And she sees that the subjects of these pieces of art were all nude and, let's just say, in very compromising situations, right? It was not exactly as tasteful as Michelangelo's David, right? Think a little bit more risque than that. And each of the subjects and the art, at least the ones that Angela saw, were strangely enough also missing both sets of their front teeth. It's pretty clear that her dad is rather uncomfortable with this, but he doesn't want to seem rude since he's relying on this woman's help. So he directs grandma to get the kids and wait in a different room while mom and dad look at all of this rather provocative art. So grandma and the kids walk into another room, and as they're leaving, Angela overhears her parents being told by the front desk woman, well, I'm going to give you the grand tour of this house. And they're going into the next room, and what Angela saw in there wasn't really all that much better than the first room. It seemed like every room in this house was full of paintings and sculptures of dead and dying people and menacing animals and very provocative type things. And it was just weird, right? Especially for a supposed bed and breakfast where the vibes are supposed to be homey and comforting and inviting to see all this kind of really out there art. So grandma takes the kids and she decides, well, I'll just wait with the kids outside. And they kind of go out around the back of the house to wait for Angela's parents to get done with this big grand tour. And they're waiting for a while, but eventually the parents do come out to join the rest of the family and let them know that the woman is now going to be placing her call to this other hotel to make the reservations for them. And then finally, they can get the heck out of there once she finishes her call. And Angela's parents were just kind of talking about how strange it is to have such violent and provocative art everywhere in a bed and breakfast. And as they're talking, her dad speaks up and says to his wife, we toured this whole house, right? And they're supposedly all booked up, but did you see another person anywhere? Did you see a piece of luggage? Anything that would indicate that there's other people staying at this house? And it was true. The parents had toured the entire house, but there was no evidence that any other people were in that house other than the front desk woman. As they're waiting, they're kind of standing around this little fire pit, and Angela notices that inside of the fire pit is this kind of small structure. And she obviously didn't realize it at the time when she was very young, but later on she realized that this small structure was completely covered on all sides in these pentagrams. Which, of course, pentagrams are a symbol that's often associated with satanic religion. Like I said, Angela didn't know what that meant at the time, but it was very clear that her parents were starting to get just a little bit nervous and they wanted to get out of there. But finally, the woman comes back and with this big friendly smile lets them know that they do indeed have a room ready for them at this hotel that's just down the road a few miles away, and she gives them directions. Needless to say, the family just gets out of there as quickly as they can and feeling honestly pretty fortunate that there wasn't any vacancy at this bed and breakfast because it probably would have turned into a very weird night. And so they start going down the road towards this next hotel and hoping that it's just kind of, maybe it's just a Super 8 or a Holiday Inn or even just a crummy motel at this point would be preferable to staying at some, weird satanic bed and breakfast. On their way to this hotel, they pass by this little park that's kind of way out in the middle of nowhere. And Angela's parents kind of want to make sure that the kids get all of their energy out so that when they get to this next hotel, they can just all go right to bed. So they stop the car and they let the kids go play in this park for a little bit. And while they're playing, Angela finds this little purple necklace laying on the ground. It was this pretty little necklace and it had this little purple pendant that was hanging down. This necklace had some symbols on it that Angela didn't really recognize at the time, but she brings the necklace over to her mom to show off. Here's this pretty necklace that I found just laying in the dirt. And her mom is very carefully examining this necklace before she quickly shoves it into her purse and just tells Angela to go back to playing. And she didn't tell this to Angela at the time. It wasn't until much later on when Angela could have understood this. But she told her that there were two symbols on that pendant. And on one side was another pentagram, and on the other side was a swastika. So she had put it into her purse with the idea that she was just going to throw it away whenever they got to a suitable location. But things are now starting to kind of stack up, right? The original bed and breakfast was certainly odd. And the woman and the paintings of women who all seem to have their teeth removed and the violent and frankly obscene nature of the arts, the pentagrams, but that was all contained to the bed and breakfast. And they thought that once they left that weird place, they would kind of leave that weirdness behind them. But now they're arriving at this park that's a ways down the road, a couple of miles away, and they find this satanic Nazi necklace. And I am aware that the swastika symbol has very ancient religious origins that have nothing to do with the Third Reich, but I think, as you will see, whoever had previously worn that necklace did not have good intentions. But it's starting to get kind of late, and it looks like there's a storm that might be rolling in soon, so the family gets back into the car, and they head to the next hotel. And when they pull up, they see that it's not really a hotel so much as it is another bed and breakfast. But they go inside and they're greeted by a woman at the front desk who smiles, a very friendly smile at them. And when she smiles, she reveals that she too is missing her two front teeth, both the uppers and the lowers. And they're thinking, what the heck is going on with the teeth? Why is everybody missing their front teeth, both on the top and the bottom of their mouth, right? There is no way that this is just bad oral hygiene habits. This is too weird to be a coincidence. And when the woman walks away from the desk, Grandma, who was from upstate New York, not from this particular area, but was from upstate New York, speaks up. And she says that she recently read in an article that there was some sort of satanic cult that was practicing in this part of upstate New York. But Grandma was also kind of a jokester and loved to play pranks, so they kind of just dismissed what she was saying and didn't take it particularly seriously. But even if they took Grandma seriously, what can they even do? Right? At this point, it's too late to try to find another place, and they don't know this area. So trying to go out into the night, into this terrible storm, not knowing where they're going on these winding and narrow and sometimes not well-maintained country roads, it just would not be a safe idea. So this front desk woman starts to lead the family to their accommodations, which, surprising to them, actually led them outside of the main house. And she starts walking the family around the house. And as they're walking, this woman from the front desk kept telling Angela and her brother, who were about the same age, that she had all of this candy inside of the house and that the two of them should really later on come back into the house and they can eat candy and they can meet her kittens. But of course, the parents aren't allowed in, because the house is a total mess. There's too much mess. And if the parents came in, well, that would just be so terribly embarrassing for her. Now, Angela was very young, but she was old enough to know not to ever accept any kind of offer like this from a stranger. And besides, by this point, her parents are so creeped out that they are just watching these kids like hawks. And there's no way that they're going to let these kids go anywhere in the middle of the night. But finally, they get to their accommodations, which, as I mentioned, were not actually inside of the house, but were rather out back behind the house. It was in this apparent barn. And when they opened the door to this barn, it revealed a kind of somewhat poorly renovated interior. It was kind of drab and things looked cheap, but otherwise it seemed surprisingly normal, and it was good enough for them to just sleep for a few hours and then leave in the morning. Angela's dad, like I said, was super on edge at this point. So when they get into the room and when the front desk woman leaves, he starts going around and just looking in every nook and cranny and not even really looking for anything in particular, but he's just so creeped out by this whole situation that he's just examining every square inch of this little room to make sure that there's nothing weird going on. And the room itself was a little bit weird. First of all, it did have windows, but the windows had no curtains and they had no blinds, so there was really no privacy, right? Anybody who was outside could very easily look in. So one of the first things that they do is they start taking cushions from the couch and they start stacking them up in front of the window to at least give them a little bit of privacy. Her dad also noticed that the door to this barn had no locks at all. Which of course was an even bigger problem than the windows. So he starts kind of looking around the room, looking for anything he can use to block up the door when he notices this big dresser. And he decided that this dresser would be, of course, a good candidate to just prop up against the door in case anybody tries to come inside during the middle of the night. So he goes and he tries to grab this dresser, and he's expecting it to be very heavy because it's a big full-size dresser, but when he grabs it, it moves with almost no effort. And he's surprised to find that this dresser was on these wheels that were kind of hidden underneath, and the wheels moved completely silently, so the dresser would just glide across the floor. As he's moving the dresser, though, there's something else that kind of catches his eye. As he's moving the dresser, he could have sworn he saw the wall move. And he's thinking for a second that maybe it's just because he's so tired and he's seen things, but regardless, he decides to investigate. So he starts putting his hands along the wall that this dresser was in front of, and sure enough, he finds this little, almost perfectly camouflaged seam that's running down the length of this wall. And so he puts his hands on the wall, just kind of feeling it, and he gives it just the slightest little push. And he realizes that it wasn't a wall at all, because with the slightest little bit of push, the wall opened up, revealing that it was in fact two very well hidden double doors. And they opened up directly into the night air. But he sees something even more concerning than that. What he sees is that immediately outside of their room, immediately outside of these two mysterious double doors, is parked this dark van. And the van had been backed up against the double doors, so that the back door of this van was only inches away from these hidden double doors. And Angela's dad is absolutely furious about this, and I'm sure also very afraid. And he's probably thinking, is this some sort of cult that's planning on kidnapping my family, or what is going on here? So he starts looking around the room, and he tells everyone in the family, find whatever heavy objects that you can find, and we're going to start stacking them against both doors, both the main door that goes into the barn, as well as these hidden double doors. And that's exactly what they do. They create these barricades around both doors. I'm not really entirely sure why they didn't just leave. Maybe the storm was just so bad that it wasn't even an option. But regardless, they decide that they're going to stay and they're just going to defend themselves if push comes to shove. Around 11 p.m., the family had completed their defenses of the room, and no doubt Angela's parents had created a plan of what to do if somebody were to try to get into the room. And the parents are just kind of trying to get the kids to go to bed, and they've tried their best to hide their fear and their anger about what's going on from their kids. And so the kids aren't really aware of how serious of a situation that they're in. And just as the kids are finally starting to wind down to go to bed, they hear a very familiar voice coming from outside of the barn. It was the woman from the front desk, and she's saying, "Hey, I'm just checking in, and by the way, I made all of these blueberry muffins." And they look out the window, and sure enough, there's the woman. She looks to be all alone, and she does indeed have in her hands this big basket of blueberry muffins. And so her dad decides that he's just going to play along, right? He obviously does not trust this woman, but he also does not want to raise any alarms that he's on to whatever these people are doing. So he takes down some of the barricades to just kind of pop his head outside and say, "Okay, thank you, we're all good in here," and grabs the muffins and pulls them into the room and closes the door, puts all of the barricades back. Angela remembers just how good these muffins smelled. And because of all the craziness of the night, and because of how rural and out in the middle of nowhere they were, they hadn't been able to stop to get any dinner. And so Angela, as well as her brother, were just starving. And they are begging their parents for these muffins, just saying, "Just let us have one muffin." And her parents obviously are very adamant, saying, "No, you're not going to touch those muffins." And they take them and they put them on a shelf that's way too high for the kids to get up to. In retrospect, Angela understands that most likely those muffins were drugged. And if the family had consumed those muffins, they probably would have passed out, or worse. And then in the middle of the night, those double doors would have opened. And who knows what would have happened, but it would have definitely ended with them getting pulled into that van. She definitely did not realize the danger that her and her family were in at the time, but in retrospect, it kind of plays out in her head like a horror movie. Angela and her brother were eventually able to get to sleep after the big argument about the muffins, but as you could imagine, Mom and Dad and Grandma did not sleep very much, if at all. And both of her parents remember that late into the night, long after the kids had gone to sleep, they heard voices coming from outside, coming from all directions around the barn. It was clear that there were at least several people outside. Now, they couldn't hear what they were talking about, but it was very clear that for hours, there were people outside all around the barn who were talking. You'll remember that I mentioned that aside from her brother that was about her age, Angela also had a baby brother who was an infant. And he had woken up kind of fussing in the middle of the night around 1 a.m. And so her mom gets up to pick him up and try to calm him down. And she's just sort of walking around the room with him, trying to get him to go back to sleep when she passes a particular painting that was hanging on the wall. Now, during the daytime, this painting had shown what was clearly a kind of a fire pit. And in the background were trees. And then within the fire pit were logs that were smoldering. But now at night, I guess under different light, darker light, when she looked at this painting, what she saw very clearly were burnt corpses on the ground, and standing over them was a gigantic hooded figure. The rest of the night was surprisingly pretty uneventful. Those double doors never opened up, and whoever it was that was outside late into the night had eventually gone away. And so the sun begins to rise, and the family starts taking down all of their fortifications and putting everything back where it belonged. And as they're all kind of gathering their luggage together, who comes by but, of course, the front desk lady. And she's acting, as courteous and as friendly as ever. And she approaches the family and kind of kneels down to Angela and her brother. And she says to them, "I've got a gift for both of you." And she gives to them these little wooden hand-carved napkin holders that were carved into the shape of cats. Angela's dad goes with the front desk woman to go inside and to check out. So the rest of the family is just kind of standing around their car, which is parked in this long gravel driveway. And Angela's mom is just kind of kicking around gravel absentmindedly and kicks away this particular patch of gravel. Angela notices that after kicking away this gravel, her mom just stops and starts staring at the ground as if she's entranced by whatever this is that's underneath the gravel that she just kicked away. She kind of snaps out of this once she hears the front desk woman returning, and the woman comes up to the rest of the family to say goodbye. And it's pretty clear that this woman is very discreetly trying to kick all of the gravel back over this particular patch that her mom had just cleared. The family gets back into the car, and finally they get away from this creepy bed and breakfast. Later on, Angela's mom would explain that what she saw under the gravel was when she kicked away some of this gravel, she noticed that there were these two tiles underneath a thin layer of gravel. And on each tile was a particular symbol, which you can probably guess what they were. One symbol was a pentagram, and the other symbol was a swastika, which, as you'll recall, are the same symbols that were on the pendant necklace that they found in the park. So when they get back into the car, Angela's mom starts digging through her purse to try to find the pendant necklace, but it's gone. It's not in her purse. There's nothing else missing but that pendant necklace somehow, some way, disappeared. Angela notes that both of these B&Bs were very near to a small town called Millbrook, New York. And one was a farmhouse and the other was something like an old mill. And she was actually able to find the website for the bed and breakfast that they stayed at that night. But it was pretty clear that this building was now under new ownership, who probably had nothing to do with the creepy night that she and her family had years and years ago. So she didn't provide any more information than that. So who were these people? Was this some kind of satanic Nazi cult? And why did the women all have their teeth removed? And most importantly, what would have happened if those double doors had burst open in the middle of the night?